I want to make a few pointers on the midterm in a second. And let me be really clear. The reminders I'm going to be giving you on the midterm, first of all, I should say everything I'm going to be saying are things that can be found in those materials that I've provided, whether it's the videos or a little bit of like writing points, or whether it's the instructions in the first half of the exam itself, on the first page of the exam. So there's nothing, I'm not going to be saying anything new or unusual or extraordinary. But what I'm going to do is just based on my grading of the exam, point out some things that everybody in general could focus on a little bit more going into the final exam, right? And so that's to be expected because you're taking this format that I have set up for you for the first time. And part of doing it and then being graded is just getting a little more familiar with what I'm actually looking for. So I'll do that in a second. Today we'll take attendance. You know what? I'll come to that. I'll do it right now. So we started our discussion last class of some preliminaries with the Odyssey, what kind of book it is, what the function of the book is, as a kind of Bible for the Greeks, a work that was designed to please and instruct, to provide understanding of one's way of life, including religion, but also moral precepts and values and things of that sort. We talked about the meaning of the title, the Odyssey. It's some kind. What does the title mean? What does that title mean? The Odyssey. My God, are we all, first of all, there's like nobody here today. This is, I have to say that our attendance all semester has been really good, but I have to say definitely today is by far the worst day we've ever had. What
does it mean, like journey or like?
Okay, it's some type of journey, but literally, and we'll come to that. That's a kind of secondary or derivative meaning that is really important. Don't get me wrong, it's really, really important. But the primary meaning of the word Odyssey is what? It's actually really simple. It's a Greek word. What word is it connected to in the text, or what name is it connected to?
Odysseus?
Odysseus. Yeah, so what does Odyssey mean? What's your guess? We said it last time. Whew.
Is it like a journey?
The life?
We just mentioned that.
A god?
Everybody must have a hangover or something.
I'm sorry, I'm just on the train.
Oh, Natalie, you're doing just fine. It's the rest of the class. What, anyone want to try it again? Yes, it has to do with a journey, but that's kind of a derivative meaning that the word has taken on. This isn't complicated. What does the word Odyssey mean? It's connected to the name Odysseus, right? It's a version of the name Odysseus. That's the root of the word.
Would it be like Odysseus' story?
Yeah, exactly. This is all this title means. The story of Odysseus. It's actually like a really plain Jane title. But two things it does that are really crucial. You notice in the opening lines of the poem, and I'm going to call it a poem because it's technically speaking an epic poem that's written in a certain meter, that's a metered speech. It's poetic speech. And typically it was actually sung with a certain type of rhythmic song that is also a story. Okay, so it's the story of Odysseus. It's that simple, and it signifies one thing you find in the opening lines, which is the centrality of this single character as being the real focus of the entire story, and who he is seems to be and what he does and what he goes through really sits at the center of this text, right? It's the story of that man of twists and turns. Then the other aspect of this title that we talked about was the fact that the expression an Odyssey has come to mean a journey, right? And obviously we can see why that is, because the story of Odysseus is the journey of Odysseus. The story is bound up with the format and the structure of a certain type of journey. What exactly is Odysseus's journey?
Him going home.
Okay, good. Him going home. This man, we'll talk about the concept of a hero a little bit today, but we'll pick it up more next time. When we think of a hero, we think of heroic deeds, great, extraordinary deeds done for some just cause or great moral purpose, often to protect or defend a people or a way of life. Heroes are great human beings. They're excellent human beings who do excellent things, the most challenging things. Now, what's so interesting about this man, Odysseus, as a hero, is his primary task is not to save democracy or protect liberty or save a nation. His goal is to get back home. Something very simple, something very prosaic, something very self-interested, right? And something we can all relate to, right? And there's many interesting problems with him attempting to get back home. Why is he having such a problem? What's going to happen when he gets back home, and so on and so forth. So his journey is to get back home. What are the 2 points that he's trying to go from point A to point B? What's point A and point B? Where has he come from, and specifically, where is he trying to get to?
From Troy to Ithaca.
Good. He's coming from Troy and he's trying to get back to Ithaca. And there are some questions as to why. I think that the 2 big questions that get set up that we're going to discuss here in the first part of class is, why is it taking so long for him to get back home? And 2, what do you think is going to happen when he gets back home? One of the fascinating elements of this text is that it charts a 10-year story. The prequel, the Iliad, was a 10-year story of fighting the Trojans, and the Odyssey is a second decade, a second 10-year cycle in which Odysseus tries to come back home. And what's fascinating is the story actually picks up virtually at the end of that 10 years, right? And he's right on the precipice of maybe actually making it home. We talked about last class that Zeus and Athena are both on Mount Olympus discussing the fate of Odysseus. We talked about how the gods play this role in influencing and controlling the fate or destiny of human beings, but we also acknowledge that human beings have some of their fate in their own hands, and the gods are not 110%, so to speak, in control. So the question becomes, what's going to happen to Odysseus if and when he makes it home? Of course, there's a question of whether you think he's going to make it home at all. But he's actually just about at the end rather than the beginning of his journey when we start this text. And it really is interesting to discover when we're actually going to learn about the beginning of the journey, because eventually we will get the beginning of the journey from Troy, but we are not going to get that story at the beginning of the text. We're actually going to get it almost in the middle of the text. It's very interesting. Okay, so we want to continue to discuss this situation and also why Homer has decided to depict this situation at this moment, in which particularly Odysseus is not actually present on Ithaca at all. And if what's being depicted is kind of like a stage, and it's the stage of Ithaca where Telemachus is taking the lead in matters pertaining to his family and to Ithaca and its politics at large. Odysseus is not on stage at all. Can anyone tell me what book? I mean, Odysseus is talked about a lot from the beginning of the text. The first people, quote unquote, people to talk, characters, I should say, who talk about Odysseus. Who are the first characters to talk about Odysseus? That's that's maybe something you didn't think about, but it ends up being important. Can anyone tell me who the first characters are that talk about Odysseus?
Athena and Zeus.
Absolutely, the gods talk about this heroic figure, Odysseus. And one interesting question is, why does Homer have them talking about Odysseus first? Then we get down on Ithaca in the mortal realm of Earth, right? And of course, there is much discussion of Odysseus and his fate and what has happened to the man. And of course, Telemachus. What does Telemachus do in the first 4 books? He calls this assembly, right? Where he's trying to like be a man and he's trying to be an adult, and the suitors are, in conflict with him, and he feels the burden of this kind of tension between them, and he's not really sure whether he can be kind of man enough to handle their oppositional attitude. He calls an assembly, and what does he ultimately say he's going to do?
He's going to look for his father.
Yeah, he's going to look for his father, or at the very least, try to get word of his father in terms of what may have happened to him, right? So in those first 4 books that are often called the Telemachia, right? Which is just to say the story of Telemachus, right? Odysseus is not depicted. He's talked about much, but he's not depicted on stage at all. When do we actually see Odysseus in the flesh?
Book 5.
Book 5. Very good. Very good. Okay. Question. When we finally see Odysseus appear on stage, it's like a kind of cameo. He's been concealed from our view and everybody's been talking about him. It builds all this anticipation. It builds all kinds of speculation about what's going on with him. And then we finally see him. What is he doing when we first see him depicted directly in the text?
He was crying.
He was crying. Very good. Can you imagine this great heroic man? Let me clarify. The Greek word for a man is andra, A-N-D-R-A, andra, right? And the Greek word for courage, everybody knows what courage is. It's one of the important cardinal virtues of ancient Greece and Rome, courage. The Greek word for courage is andria, and andria literally means manliness, right? So one who is courageous. What is the cardinal virtue of a hero? It's courage, right? Which is to say an overcoming of the fear of death in the face of many obstacles to succeed at some task, right? The courage gives them the ability to succeed under dire circumstances that other people would chicken out and turn their tail and run, right? So the cardinal virtue of a hero is courage, aka manliness. And Odysseus is supposed to be, therefore, like a manly man, like a character out of a Western like Clint Eastwood, or Clint Eastwood in, oh my God, I'm thinking of all these old movies now. The Dirty Harry movies, if anybody has seen those. who are the manly men of Hollywood today that people have seen movies that you all like? This guy is supposed to be like macho. I know we live now in a world where there's like toxic masculinity and men are supposed to act more like women, but there's still a segment of our society that still demands, because it's like it's built in our DNA and all those hormones that float around in men and women. They want manly men. Men want to be manly, and there are still a segment of women who want manly men. They, both may be minorities these days, but can anyone think of some actors that are like manly men and they take on roles as such? Okay, so Ariba has The Rock. Okay, I like that one. He's not my favorite manly man, but I definitely agree that he fits that mold for the most part. Any other examples?
Liam Neeson.
Liam Neeson. Wow, that's a very sophisticated one. Okay, good. Yeah, because he's not like all muscles and stuff, but he has that like that tough guy attitude. He's gonna like save his daughter from a bunch of robbers or whatever that movie is, Taken. I haven't seen it. Jason, how do you pronounce his last name? Mamau. I know he's the guy who played the I know who, like Neptune or something like that. Chris Evans, I think I know the name. I guess I've seen him. Anyone seen Jason Statham movies? Does anyone know who Jason Statham is?
No.
Oh my God, you're missing out on a great manly man.
What's
He's British,
what's the name of
maybe.
one of his movies?
What's that?
What's the name of one of his movies?
Well, he was in The Expendables, and he's also been in a bunch of Guy Ritchie movies. And he was in the Transporter movies, like maybe 10, 15 years ago. I'm dating myself here, as you can see. But he's still around, and he's still like, maybe he's now generationally a little bit. Anyway, you get the idea. Manly man, tough guy. We all know tough guys don't cry, right? That's like the thing. They're like stoic, and to be stoic means like you don't show emotion, because to show emotion is to show weakness, and manly men don't show weakness to nobody, right? Even, well, Trump, you can either say he tries to act like a manly man, but he's not really. He's like some kind of fraud or something like that. Or you can say, yeah, he's a manly man and he has some of these qualities too. Independent of politics, like he at least affects some of these qualities, if you don't believe he actually has them. So here we have Odysseus. He's crying like a little baby for $1,000. What else is he doing beside just crying in this first scene that we see him? Does anyone remember?
He's looking out into the ocean.
Very good. Wow, that you get $1,000. We'll take that out of the Federal Reserve and I'll have it wired to you as digital money. If it's worth anything by the time you get it, you'll be lucky. You might get a gallon of gas for it.
I'll take the extra credit.
It's more everlasting. That was good. Why is he looking across the ocean?
He's probably plotting a way to leave.
That's half of it. What's the other half? Absolutely. So he's like prisoner on the island of Ogygia, where Calypso, the nymph, has him prisoner. And he's almost like kind of her sex slave. I mean, you're never going to see the word sex in this text. You're never going to see, like, it's not going to be explicit, because that's just the way the Greeks do not talk about these things directly. But it's very clear she desires him as a husband, and and she's depicted as, beautiful. She is not any ordinary mortal. She is the daughter of a Titan. So she's not a human being, right? And of course, in one of the fascinating things about the world of Greek mythology is that gods and Titans can get with and procreate with mere mortals, right? It happened all the time. Zeus, for example, was always chasing women around, and, well, I should say, engaging in his own version of toxic masculinity with them. So Odysseus is effectively, apparently, held prisoner by her because she wants him as a husband, and she actually gets really mad at the gods when the gods have said that, he's got to be released, right? Because she's like, gosh darn it, the male gods always get what they want. If they want some mortal female, they get to have them. But me, a female nymph, right, a daughter of a Titan, I don't get what I want. And there's this interesting, like, sexual politics. It's sexual, by which I mean like male female, like sex, or you could call it gender politics, whatever you want. But there's an interesting little the feud between the men and the women of the gods. Okay, so there's a big question as to why he's depicted this way and the significance of it, because instead of being depicted in a moment of strength and kind of virility, if you will, he's depicted in a moment of great vulnerability. And of course, it's not going to be the first time we're going to see him cry in this text. Okay, so we want to think about a little bit what's going on there. And then lastly, I'm going to introduce this concept of Xenia. This is, of all the themes of the text, this is one of the most important, maybe not the most important, but it's one of the most important. And it's a theme that really ties together virtually everything you see depicted in this text. Every time there is an interaction between characters, almost always some version of this thing called Xenia is being enacted or referenced in some way, shape, or form. And so what does Xenia mean? I'll give you a little bumper sticker right now until we get to it. But Xenia is basically guest host friendship, or hospitality. And it signifies both a relationship between a guest and a host, meaning somebody shows up on somebody's island, or somebody shows up in somebody's palace, or what have you, as a guest, and the host, which means, the occupant of the island or the house, the palace, has some type of ongoing interaction with them. They have a relationship. So it signifies both a relationship between a guest and a host, but it also signifies a kind of ritual or a set of procedures and a set of rules that are supposed to be followed in terms of how both guest and host carry themselves in this interaction. And it's connected with really the basic idea of a set of manners, right? When you sit in a classroom, there's a set of manners expected of you. When you go out to dinner, to say a formal meal, there's a set of rules and expectations and customs and manners you're supposed to follow, right? And if you don't follow them, you get kind of singled out, and people look at you. They look at you out of the corner of your eye saying, what's wrong with that person? Don't they understand they're supposed to behave properly, right? Or, you go to church or synagogue or mosque. There are a set of ways you're supposed to conduct yourself in a kind of dignified, civilized way with, the right degree of solemnity and seriousness. That is respect and acknowledgement of the rules of conduct of that situation. So that's something like what Xenia is. And what's really important, while you don't realize it if you're not familiar with the concept, And this concept will really be referenced explicitly throughout the text. It's not simply a kind of, an intellectual idea that a literary critic or a professor invented. It's something on display throughout the text constantly, and is referenced directly when Odysseus and his men are in the cave of Polyphemus, which is a story that begins to be told in book 9, or a story that is told in book 9. And so we see this guest host relationship unfold in the very beginning of the text with the way Telemachus interacts with Mentes. Does anyone remember that character, Mentes? Mentes.
Yes.
Good. I feel like, has anybody done the reading? Oh my God. We all know our manly men from Hollywood, but do we know who Mentes is? Okay. Actually, who is Mentes really?
Athena.
Yes, Athena in disguise, right? And she goes down there not just to help Telemachus out, but also to kind of test him, right? We've seen the god test Job, and Athena does something kind of similar. She's like the boss in disguise, who goes down to talk to Telemachus to help him out, to set him on his way in search for his father, in hopes of dealing with the situation they've got on Ithaca. But also she's interested to see what kind of man he is, how she's going to be treated as a guest, especially in light of the fact that Telemachus obviously doesn't know it's Athena, at least not at first. He starts to have some like kind of inklings at some point. Well, how does Telemachus carry himself with Mentes? Is he so he's the host and Mentes is the guest. Does Telemachus carry himself? How does he carry himself with Mentes? Does he act as a good host?
I thought so.
Delavan says yes. Natalie, he carries himself as a well-rounded young man. Absolutely. And we could say he carries himself a lot like what you might expect from his father. And you see that there are a lot of parallels created between Telemachus and his father in terms of what you would expect from these type of people. And it's almost as if Telemachus is a kind of, he's almost like a carbon copy of Odysseus, but he's a younger man as opposed to Odysseus, who's now a middle-aged man. He's not old, but he's kind of toward the end of the prime of his life, right? And of course, he's been away for 20 years. Okay, so we'll look at Xenia. Oh, let me take attendance right now. I'm kind of going in funky order. So Felicia is here. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And Karen, is Karen here? No. And Thomas? No Thomas. And Jan?
Here.
How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good. And Ariba is here. How you doing, Ariba?
I'm good, thank you.
And Nisha?
Yes, Professor, I'm here.
How are you?
Good, Professor. Thank you.
Great. And Clement is here. How are you, Clement?
Well,
And Fahim?
I'm here.
How are
I'm here.
you?
Good.
And Delavan is here. How are you doing, Delavan?
I'm well. Sorry, I'm having trouble unmuting, but I'm well.
Great. Awesome. Got it. Thank you. And Faye is here. How are you doing, Faye?
Hi, I'm doing good.
Awesome. And Sachin?
I'm here.
How are you?
Okay.
And Anastasia is here, right? How are you, Anastasia?
Right, I'm here. I'm good.
Awesome. And Alexander is here. He's going to unmute in a second. Is Nada here? No, Nada's not here. And Angelica, I think, told me she wasn't going to be able to make it. And Michael.
Yes, I'm here, Professor.
How are you, Michael?
Good.
And Kazi.
Yep, I'm here.
How are you, Kazi?
I'm good, thank you.
And Rosemary. No. And Brian. No. And Carlos is here. How are you, Carlos?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. And Natalie.
I'm here. How are you?
I'm pretty good. And Vicky. No. And Ashley.
I'm here, Professor.
There you are. Got it. And Ashley, you're here, right? Where's Ashley? No, Ashley. Okay. All righty. So let me just make a few comments about the midterm that will be helpful for the final exam. There we go. So, couple things. First thing, you want to answer the questions absolutely as directly as possible. The topics that really define those what you should write are the questions, right? And couple things. So absolutely, when you write an essay, you work from general to specific. You make a kind of general claim that's supported by specific evidence. But one thing you don't need to do in these questions is make broad statements about the entire text, right? I mean, these questions are not directed toward asking you to give a summary of the whole story, right? And one thing you want to avoid is providing summary of the story for the sake of summary. Now, in answering a certain question, you might need to summarize some segment of the story, but it's kind of understood between the reader and the writer, what the basics of the story are. And the focus really should be on answering the questions directly, right? So that's really crucial. And then in answering them, I just thought about it today. It's really simple. In trying to answer, I know what is the literal or the figurative meaning of the fruit, right? All the answers are in the text, right? They're there somewhere. You may have to take the language of the text and read into it. You might have to read between the lines. You might have to interpret. You will have to do those things, right? But the answers are there in the text, right? So the first thing you should be concerned with when you try to understand or figure out what the answer is that the text and its language have the answers there. And I think I said it before, but you want to try to stay as close to the text as possible. What does that mean? To stay close to it simply means, what does the text actually say? Not kind of, sorta, what does it say? Not in general, it kind of says like, this. The question is, what does it say specifically, right? For example, this is like a real no-brainer, I think, for most everybody, but there were some people who were a little foggy on this. If you want to talk about, what kind of knowledge does the fruit I'm sure you're all totally done with the midterm. You've like blocked out you've moved on from it, right? It's done. And like, you don't want to think about the readings connected with it and the questions for it. I get it. But for example, like, what is the meaning of the fruit? Well, the story tells you quite clearly, at least the first, portion of it. This doesn't explain everything about its meaning, but I mean, it's the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? So obviously the fruit represents knowledge of good and evil. Like it actually tells you what the figurative meaning of the fruit is. That's one that was kind of interesting things, but you know, so I mean, literally the language of the text provides you the guidepost of answering the question. So it's really important. Connected with that, when you make a claim, you want to draw on the text as much as possible. And in some cases, you might actually cite passages. But even when you're not, you want to be referencing specific passages in the text and providing a notation of them, right? Yeah. So to say support with evidence from the text means drawing on the language of the text. Then last thing, and I think a lot of people could improve on this. And I think part of it starts with just looking at the materials I've provided a little more carefully, because everything I'm saying here are things that are mentioned in different places in the materials I've provided. And the materials provided for the final exam are basically the same. It's the same test. It's just different texts with different questions. That's the only real difference. One thing I noticed is that, I mean, I'm asking you to write in sentence paragraph form, right? So, well, let me ask everybody. What separates one paragraph from the next? Why do you have one paragraph here and another paragraph here? Why don't you just have like one continuous paragraph, for example?
They talk about different points, so you have a transition sentence.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, and the paragraphs can be broken up in different ways, and it's up to your discretion to make a judgment about how you want to separate out the topics. Right. But, you know, the basic rule of thumb is that a sentence is not just a grammatical structure with a subject and a predicate. It's also a unit of meaning. Right. So one sentence represents one thought. Right. So one paragraph represents a series of sentences, aka a series of thoughts that all come under the same heading or the same topic or the same theme. And the moment that you've shifted to a distinctly different or sufficiently different topic or theme, that's when you need to start another paragraph. And when you look at any writing, the decent writing, if you ask yourself a simple question that you do in grade school that I still do today when I pick up the paper, for example, or pick up a book, I ask myself, why is this paragraph a paragraph? Why has the author chosen to indent here, start a new paragraph, and then it ends here? And I look at what's written there and I compare it to what's written before and after it. And with a good writer, you're going to discern a very clear and distinct topic that they have isolated from topics, you know, A and C, and that middle paragraph is topic B, right? So some people didn't provide paragraph breaks at all. And then the other thing paragraph breaks do is that they just give a signpost, an indication to the reader, right? That a new thought or a new topic is being started. And it allows them to just kind of scan the page in a more orderly way. And the reader can see the logic that you've set up of why these 5 sentences are a paragraph and why the next 5 sentences are a paragraph. So these are some of the writing issues that are part of the grade. Number 1. Number 2, these are really the kind of issues that you address when you proofread, right? Because when we write kind of, we extemporize, we're spontaneous. We're not always thinking in a linear way when we write. A lot of different ideas and thoughts just come out. And then it's the proofreading stage that allows you to take all those ingredients that you've kind of thrown in the pot and really organize them in a coherent fashion. So I can't stress enough, and I say it in the video, proofreading is not really about correcting spelling errors and minor grammatical mistakes. Why is that? Because you guys all have a sufficient grasp of spelling. I mean, you've got spell check and grammar. You've got even grammar check now, that those types of issues are normally not the biggest challenge you face as a writer at the college level. One of the big challenges everybody faces, I face it too as a writer, because every time you're writing something new, it's you're formulating fresh thoughts that are raw, but it's one of organization. So that's really important in terms of things to consider going into the final exam, which is going to be here soon enough. I mean, it's April 12th already. Okay, so let's get going here on some of the fun stuff, and we'll have a little bit of some conversation. So I really want to address more this issue of the situation that we find ourselves in, or that Ithaca finds itself in at the outset of this text. Before that, I just want to make a brief note, and I want to show you a map of ancient Greece and the Mediterranean to just help you to visualize this world that we're really looking at, right? So we talked about how the Odyssey means the story of Odysseus, and there is a journey that takes place, right? And I'm calling it the external journey, or the physical journey, the journey of Odysseus and his men from Troy to Ithaca, right? When we talked about Job, we talked about the city of man and the city of God, right? And the premise of the city of man and the city of God was that there's really two dimensions to the human being, and therefore two dimensions to human life. There's a body and a soul. And there's a body that's connected with the here and now and the material world and material well-being and all those oxen and the family members he has and all the wealth and the land he has. But then he also has a soul. And within the context of Job, it's about his faith or spiritual connection, his fear in the Lord, and his spiritual devotion to God. Right. And that's the city of God, this realm of the human spirit or the human soul. In this journey of Odysseus, we have something very similar. There is a physical journey on a ship, and that's what I want to reference in just a second with these maps. But there's also, I wouldn't use the word spiritual because it's not so much a religious journey, but it's a psychological journey, right? As we go through our lives physically, from time A to time B to time C to time D, or when we go from point A to point B to point C, we go on our own journey through our lives. We have experiences. And what basically is experience? Experience is basically like the external world, that physical world that we journey through, impinging on our psychology. The Greek word for soul is psyche. The word psychology literally means the science of the soul, right? And my phone is doing something funny. So psychology simply has to do with all those elements that are part of the human being's experience that are internal to us, that are mental and emotional, right? The Greeks divide up the soul between elements of like a thought, kind of like mind and ability to reason on one hand, and then emotions and passions on the other. So for the Greeks, the realm of psychology are all those immaterial, intangible things that make you, that have to do, you would just say with your heart and your mind, right? The language of psychology that the Greeks established, I believe, has not really been transcended by modern psychology or cognitive neuroscience or any of that gobbledygook. We still talk about our mental activity and our emotional activity as constituting like the core of our psychological life. And for the Greeks, the word soul just means that element of the human being that's not It's something more than just their physical body, right? So what are we coming back? The simple point. There's a physical journey through time and space that Odysseus goes on. But in the process of that physical journey, he has experiences that impact his psychology, his soul, his self. We call it like a self, right? And therefore, there is an internal psychological journey that he goes on here. All right. So a lot of this story invokes a kind of seafaring imagination, like ships, the ocean, the water, Poseidon's disruption of the water, are all, Odysseus is looking across the ocean as he cries. The ocean is a gigantic character in this text. It has a very significant place, which we'll talk about more later on. So you might just ask the question, well, why the heck is the ocean so important? Well, look at Greece, ancient, modern Greece, it's all the same. So here's ancient Greece. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this peninsula right here is modern day Greece, right? Here's Athens right here, the most famous city of all Greece, ancient and modern. However, ancient Greece of the ancient times going back to the 14th century BC through to the 5th, 4th century BC, when Greece had some of its major cultural achievements that it's become known for ever since. Greece really was this whole area going all the way from modern day Turkey over here to the island of Crete down here, which is split between Greece and Turkey today, and then over here to the Greek peninsula, right? So like actually, instead of having a landmass as the center of Greece, like really the center of Greek life was the Aegean Ocean. And so this is the Mediterranean down here, and like over here, over to this side, you have like Israel, and down here you've got Egypt, and here you've got the rest of North Africa, and over here you're starting to get into like Spain and France and whatnot, right? But you can see a lot of ancient Greece consisted of a lot of kind of peninsulas sticking out into the water, islands like Ithaca over here, tiny island right here, and then all these little islands, the Cyclades Islands right here, very famous islands of ancient Greece and modern Greece as well. And Plato once described the Greeks living around the Aegean, which is this right here, this body of water right north of the Mediterranean, is the Greeks were like frogs around a pond, right? Because most of Greek civilization is very mountainous in the Greek peninsula. So most of Greek civilization developed on the edges of the landmass out in the water. And the Greeks were a great seafaring people, right? Athens was famous for its navy. And eventually in the 4th century, 5th century BC, there was this great war between Sparta on the one hand and Athens on the other. And Sparta was the land power with the infantry troops, and Athens was the maritime power with a powerful navy, right? And so two of the dominant things that led the Greeks out onto the Aegean were trade on the one hand and war on the other. And it's one reason why the Greeks in the ancient world were so cosmopolitan. They were so exposed to other ways of life, right? They were not an insular culture. They were the opposite. They were an open-minded culture, particularly the city of Athens, that exposed themselves to other points of view. One of the things that's so fascinating about the Odyssey as a journey is that it's all about Odysseus's exploration and exposure to all these different types of ways of life. Now, he doesn't meet Egyptians or Phoenicians or Trojans for that matter, in the Odyssey. He meets a lot of fantastical civilizations and fantastical types of beings. But you can start to understand just why the ocean is such a central character in this tale, just by looking at this map and looking at what, because of course the pond here is what? The pond is the Aegean, which is this body of water right here. So here very quickly, you get, I don't know how, literary scholars have come up with quite a map like this, that they actually have determined these locations, because that seems like a bit of a stretch to me. But here you've got Troy way over here. And then you've got Odysseus's journey ultimately back home to Ithaca 14 right here. And you can see one thing: Odysseus does not go from point A to point B. He takes a lot of detours, right? And I want to step into the question of exactly why that might be the case. So I want to talk now about the characters and the situation that Odysseus, well, the situation on Ithaca. So just like the Bible, there's a fairly clear great chain of being, or hierarchy, a cosmic hierarchy of different types of being in a very specific hierarchical order. And of course, we talked about last time the Olympian gods, which include Zeus and Athena, Poseidon and Hermes. And Zeus, of course, is the father and king of gods and men. He's the god of all gods, kind of the king. And of course, then what you see on earth are kings ruling over their people in a way that's not totally dissimilar to the way Zeus rules over the other gods on Mount Olympus. Then we've got this interesting, like, intermediary type beings that are not exactly humans. I never know where to put some of them, because they're kind of supernatural beings. And so in that sense, they're superior to humans, but some of them are like primitive beasts that are actually kind of below humans. But we've got Calypso, we've got Polyphemus, who we're going to encounter later. And then later on, we're going to encounter these two diabolical, I think the best word for them is creatures, Scylla and Charybdis. So then we turn to the human characters, right? And we get to Telemachus, Odysseus' son, Penelope. Who is Penelope?
His wife.
His wife. And then Odysseus and his men. And we learned last class that all his men have perished for some reason on their way home from Troy. And then, at least on Ithaca, we get all these people called suitors, right? And the lead suitors, and they're almost like the diplomatic representatives of the suitors, are Antinous, Amphinomos, and Eurymachus, right? They're the three suitors of all the suitors who are present, and there's a lot of them. It's like a whole crowd of them. These are the three suitors that are always named by their name. They're not just called the suitors. And while you don't realize it now, Homer is foreshadowing the role of these three suitors, which is going to emerge much later on in the text. So there's a reason why they're being presented in such a prominent way here. The first question we need to answer, however, is who or what are these suitors, and why are they in Odysseus's household, right? They're actually living in Odysseus's palace, right? And it's like dozens of them. And there's somewhere in the text that actually gives you a number. And I only want to say dozens because I never remember the actual number. Who are these people? And, what does it mean to be a suitor?
They're unmarried men and they want to marry Penelope.
Okay, very good. They're relatively young, unmarried men, right? So they're younger than Odysseus, but they're clearly a little bit older than Telemachus. Telemachus is like a late teenager on the verge of being 20. So there's something very interesting. Telemachus is a really funny age, right? What does Telemachus know? I'll come back to the suitors in a second. What does Telemachus know about his father? Has Telemachus lived a lot with his father?
Not at all. He
Yeah,
doesn't
not
know.
at all. Telemachus has grown up his entire life, with the exception of like being an infant, which of course he doesn't remember. You know, he is about the age of Odysseus's trip to Troy and back, which is 20 years, right? So maybe he's just a hair over 20, right? Because we're in the last weeks of the second 10-year period, right? Telemachus doesn't know his father firsthand at all. How does he know about his father at all? He just knows what? How has he learned about his father? Just by default.
From his mother and from other people who live
Yeah,
there.
sure. So, I mean, one thing we discover in the first 4 books is that even though we don't encounter Odysseus directly, he has a reputation that precedes him, and he is famous. He's even famous to the gods. They like Odysseus. They care about what happens to Odysseus. They're actually intrigued, just as the reader is, to find out what's going to happen to Odysseus. And I mean, Athena really acknowledges she has a kind of soft spot for Odysseus. What is one of the problem? Did anyone pick up on this? One of the problems of Telemachus's identity? What is he can? And so you discover in the opening books that he's like kind of insecure. He's like a young man who's not really like found his stride, and he's pushing against these suitors who are a little bit older than him and more confident than him. What's one reason why why Telemachus isn't like totally confident? He's got an issue. And it has to do with the fact that he's never lived with his father. And he's been, yeah. His mother's been a single mother the whole time he's been alive.
Yeah, he's not sure that Odysseus is his father.
Absolutely. He has no clear way to really know, other than what people tell him, that Odysseus is his father. Now, Odysseus is this heroic figure who did great things in Troy. If you are his son, then you have some kind of chip off that old block, right? And you're also of that aristocratic lineage, right? How do you become a king in this world? Well, typically, if you're not conquering somebody else and becoming and making yourself king, you're part of a hereditary dynasty, right? So, and that gives you a kind of bloodline status. You're an aristocrat. What does it mean to be an aristocrat? It means to be just born from a noble person who is considered to have noble blood. It's like a social status that is granted either by conquest and becoming powerful, or you're already powerful and you're born into it. That's really, for thousands of years, that's how it worked in humanity. The suitors themselves, what kind of men are they in terms of their social status?
Officially, they are also aristocrats, but they do not behave accordingly.
Very good. Very good. So on paper, and this is something the Greeks understood like really early on about aristocrats. On paper, the suitors are also aristocrats, meaning they're of high birth, high born, they're noble. And so the word noble perfectly captures the ambiguity here. To be nobility is to be a form of aristocracy, to be born into a certain social status. But noble also has to do with your sense of virtue and the way you carry yourself and your sense of dignity and decency and things of that sort. So the funny thing about the suitors is that they're noblemen, but they don't act in a noble way. And for the entirety of Homer's depiction of these suitors, he's going to depict these noble men acting ignobly, meaning the opposite of noble. They're going to be acting in a very base and a very crass, a very rude, even grotesque way throughout. It's also captured in the word aristocrat. Does anyone know what the Greek word aristocrat means? Aristocracy. Does anyone know literally what the prefix aristo on aristocracy means? Aristocracy is like a form of government, just like democracy, right?
Aristo means best
Yeah, very good. How do you know that?
from your lecture.
Oh, good. Well, that means you followed it carefully. So yeah, the Greek word aristo means the best. So they're the best because they're born into a high status, but they don't act that way. They don't act that way. And that contrast between Telemachus and the suitors is not only really visible, it's actually really important to distinguish men in this case who act in a decent, righteous way and ones who don't. Okay, so the suitors are single men who are eligible to, what do they want to do again? What do they want?
They want Penelope. They want to, I think they want to just kind of become royal at the end of the day.
Yeah, they want to marry Penelope because Odysseus is long since gone. Come on, folks, what does everybody, so we're talking about the situation here a little bit. What does everybody think about Odysseus? The dude has been gone for 20 years. They fought at Troy for 10, and boy, he's had 10 years to get back and he hasn't made it. What are some of the conclusions that these people must have reached?
That he was
About-
dead.
That he's yeah.
Okay, so number one, he's dead. They all hope he's dead. They all wish he's dead because they want what they want. They want to get with Penelope. What's the alternative to he's dead? Remember, this situation is all set in motion about what the hell's happened with Odysseus. And Telemachus wants to get word by going to Sparta. Let's go back here. He wants to go to Sparta, and he does. And he speaks with Helen and Menelaus in particular. Menelaus is the brother of Agamemnon, and Agamemnon, he was the one who lost Helen. She was taken by Paris back to Troy. And then his brother Agamemnon puts together the Greek army to go off and get them. And among other people, he recruited Odysseus, but also Achilles, right? AKA Brad Pitt in Troy, the movie, if you've seen that. So then he also goes to Pylos, where Nestor is. And Nestor is like one of the older kind of warlord generals who also was recruited and fought and was maybe more wise than brave because he was an older man during the Greek War or during the Trojan War. So he goes there to get word of Odysseus. And this all has to do with, ideas about what's happened to Odysseus in this situation. So either he's dead or what's the other alternative?
He has abandoned his family.
Yeah, I mean, what you're really saying is he's not dead, and for some darn reason he hasn't come home, right? And I mean, what's worse? He can't come home because he's dead, or he can't come home but he's alive and he hasn't. In some ways, it's almost but it's almost worse that he's alive and hasn't made it home yet. In terms of, all the obligations of home and like, doesn't he want to be there? Raises some interesting questions. When he's with Calypso, it's described as him being there stuck against his will, right? But I mean, there are obviously some interesting ambiguities. If a mortal man was with this nymph and she was like in love with him, and he's there for like 7 years, you can imagine that, that he might have some natural desire to be there to some extent. and it's kind of ambiguous. So let's be clear. What moment have we entered in? The camera has like come down in the opening scene of the film where the credits are still like rolling. And we're in this moment of looking, the camera is looking at Ithaca at the very moment where Penelope seems to be on the verge of having to decide about picking one of these suitors. And she's at this almost like the 11th hour of hoping, you know, this is the last moment that Odysseus has a chance to come home and I can avoid marrying one of the suitors. So, well, we're going to see what's going to happen. Somebody's already mentioned it, but how do the suitors act as guests?
Rude.
Rude. What kind of things do they do?
They ate the food, drank
Okay.
all the wine.
Yeah, let's start with that. They drink and they eat and they drink and they eat. And they were really in touch with the pleasures of the body and they really enjoy that. Whose food are they eating and drinking?
Odysseus.
Absolutely. They're eating them out of house and home, so to speak. What else? What other kind of things do they do that are bad or inappropriate or rude?
They would speak very offensively, like cuss.
Yeah, they speak poorly. Eventually we're going to discover they've probably like taken up relationships with like servants and maids in the household, despite that they're supposed to be after Penelope's hand. What do they plot to do once Telemachus leaves? Anyone catch that?
Do they want to kill Telemachus?
Yeah, what kind of guest wants to kill their own hosts? Right? All right. So we've already seen here some examples of this thing called Xenia, which we'll see. I'm going to touch on it a little bit more, but we can flesh it out at another time if we have to. So Xenia is all about the proper carrying out of the guest-host relation. And what is the basic rule of thumb? You treat your guest with respect. You treat your host with respect, and it's a reciprocal relationship where both sides have to act the proper way. I mean, we all have a model of this today when we go over somebody's house and they're generous enough to treat us well, and we show them courtesy and respect, just like, so you come over a guest's house or a host house and they provide you, would you like a cup of coffee? Would you like to sit down? Blah, 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 right? So the suitors act as very bad guests. Very bad guests indeed, despite the fact that they're treated pretty well. Do they have a right to be doing what they're doing? This is a kind of a speculative question. There's not an obvious answer here. Do they have a right to be in Odysseus's house, like eating him out of house and home?
No.
Felicia says no.
No and yes, like 10% yes.
Okay. So is anyone else want to throw Felicia a lifeline, or anybody want to shoot her down and say, no, she's wrong? I don't know. She's kind of hedged her bets here. She's got both sides of the answer here. So it's tough to totally disagree with her.
They brought some gifts, and the Penelope accepted them. They think they're entitled to do there whatever they want, to stay there, to wait for her response.
Good. Okay. So we all know they're suitors. We all know that they're seeking Penelope's hand. It seems to be the case that there is a kind of formal ritual involving this courting of the woman for marriage, and that it seems to be the case that Odysseus's household is obliged to put them up. So on one hand, what they're doing in general is not wrong in terms of partaking of Odysseus's well-being. On the other hand, it's the way they do it that seems to be the real problem. Number one. Because we're going to turn to Penelope in just a second. What do they really want by marrying Penelope, and how do you know? let's ask this, why do they want to marry Penelope? I think you can actually pretty much tell by their actions why they really want to marry her.
I think it's because like basically Penelope lived in a palace, like their status, their stature. That's why they want to kill the son so that they can be the man to run everything.
Okay, so you're basically saying kind of two things that are connected. Ambition for power and status, evident they're willing to kill the son, and also the wealth that comes with it. The food, they want more food and wine. My goodness, why not? Who wants to argue that they're deeply in love with Penelope and they have pure affection for her?
They don't really care about her, in fact.
Okay, so you're saying no, they don't love her.
Yes.
All right, so what lets us know that their motive is not like Romeo and Juliet, chaste love?
Because when they found out that she didn't want to get married, they showed no compassion. I mean, if you love somebody, you wouldn't treat them that way. You would still have that respect. And they just lost that respect and started behaving badly.
Yeah, they don't treat her compassionately. If they really like her, they're going to respect her household. They don't. If they really like her, they're not going to try to conspire to kill her son. Like, oh my goodness. Of course they did. It's pretty much a foregone conclusion. They don't love her. They want what she represents. She represents status. And when they marry her, they marry into essentially a kingdom. Remember, Odysseus is the king of Ithaca, right? So there's political power and wealth, prestige connected with the status of being her husband. And what about Penelope? Is she a good host? She's the primary host to the suitors who are our guests.
Technically, no.
She's not a good host. Because the two questions I want to ask are, is she a good host? And is she a good wife? So you say, let's start with the host. Why is she not a good host?
She basically welcomed them by taking the gift. So she kind of initiated the fact that, okay, like she's interested. This is something that she wanted to do. And then try to plot behind their back.
Okay, so what's the one big sneaky thing she does? Does anyone remember? Where she kind of plots behind their backs and does sneaky stuff.
I don't really, I just know that she wanted to postpone it as much as she can in case her husband returned.
Absolutely. And how does she do it? Does anyone remember?
I think she has to weave like a certain ornament or fabric, and every night she does it. Every day she does it. But at night she unweaves what she did. So it's like a symbol of her holding out hope.
Very good. So she tells the suitors. Now this is a question. Does she want to get married to them? That's it. And that's not a simple answer, actually, which is why this story is so interesting. There's all this idealism in this story. There's all this like pure love between Odysseus and Penelope and all that stuff. But there's also some real reality lurking in here. I mean, my God, her husband's away for 20 years. Don't you think she wants to like move on a little bit? I think she, in the real life, she's obviously entitled to. And of course, this reflects this this difficult situation of a woman at home and her man goes off to war. You think of the Vietnam War, or you think of Iraq and Afghanistan, what the significant other has to tolerate with the fear, not only them being across the world, but the risk of their death and what it means for their future and the practical issues that come up that they might have to find someone else to make their family work. And I mean, it raises Remember, Odysseus is a hero, he's a king, but he's also a soldier. And so there's multiple facets of identity that are at work here and playing out. So she tells the suitors that I'm making this a bit of fabric. I think it's like a cloak or something. And during the day, she weaves it. And she says, when I'm done, I'll make a choice about which one of you I want to marry. But then at night, in the wee hours when nobody's paying attention, she unweaves it and postpones the day of the choice. And so in a sense, she's being very sneaky, and she's not being a very good host, because she said one thing to her guests and she's doing another. Does she wanna marry one of these men?
I think
No,
that
she doesn't.
Mhm.
Anastasia says no.
I think that she do, but she just needs confirmation to know that her husband is actually dead. She's still loyal to her husband, and she doesn't want but she needs to know if her husband is truly dead or not for her to move on.
Yeah, so it cuts many ways. Does she want to marry them? It really depends on the question of her understanding of the status of her husband. Does she really believe he's coming back? Does she think he's dead? If he's alive, why the heck is he not back? What is that? Hell, I don't want to be with that guy, right? He should have come back a long time ago. He's got some questions to answer if he does get home from her, let alone dealing with all the suitors. Okay, so there's this interesting kind of balancing act between the realistic need to move on, but obviously her hope that her husband is still alive. And of course, this is the task Telemachus performs, right? He goes off to try to get word. And of course, he's encouraged by Athena, and he's encouraged by Menelaus and Nestor, that, Odysseus is lurking out there somewhere. What else does Telemachus, apart from learning about his father, what else and his like exploits at Troy, what else does he learn about? Well, what does he learn about himself when he goes to meet Nestor and Menelaus?
That he is brave just like his dad.
And a little more than that. You're on the right track. He learns what? Essentially, it gets confirmed that he is what?
His father's son.
Yeah. And how is that conclusion reached?
From like the way he think and the decision he makes, he knows that that's exactly like what his father would do.
Well, it's about what they recognize in him, right? They see a chip off the old block. They see a reflection of Odysseus in this young man who comes before them. Any more specifics about what it is about him they see in him?
I thought it was weird. They looked at his hands and it was like, yeah, he has the same hands as his father.
Yeah, so there's two kind of parts, and they go together. They see him, they see his physical bearing. And I think when they see him, it's not just that they see what he looks like, it's also the way he carries himself. And eventually it's also how he acts. And I think part of the physical appearance, the similarity is obviously just that. I mean, it's like what a kid looks like. They look somewhat like their father. But also I think the physical similarities are a bit of a metaphor for aspects of their character, right? Their kind of moral fiber. And of course, not only he carries himself in a certain dignified way, and that kind of dignity or that status that's similar to his father kind of shines through his physical appearance in a certain way. So it's not just that he's handsome or well built, it's that his looks and his build and all these things are really kind of symbols of some kind of inner essence that's like his father, right? We'll see this issue with appearance come up again and again. All right. You know what I want to raise right now, and then we'll read and then call it a night, is Let me find it here. Okay. So at a certain point in the opening lines, there's a character, Agamemnon, who's raised, along with this character, Aegisthus and Orestes. And you're reading about these characters just in the opening pages, and you're saying to yourself, who the heck are these people and why is Homer talking about them? And we'll turn to these passages in just a moment. But let me just clarify. Agamemnon, right here, is the brother of Menelaus. Helen, at the opening of the Trojan War, the Iliad, is abducted by Paris, a Trojan, the son of the king of Troy. And Menelaus says, I want to get my wife back. Simple as that. Agamemnon, the brother of Menelaus, basically becomes the leader of the Greek army. And he has to recruit everybody and keep them together because they don't have like a formal army. It's like a bunch of warlords, kind of like mafia types, mafia dons, the different families, you could say, who have to come together and align themselves for this common purpose. And they don't do it so perfectly. It's interesting. So Agamemnon leads the war effort, right? He has a wife, Clytemnestra. He has a daughter, Iphigenia. He has a son, Orestes, and his wife has a lover by the name of this guy, Aegisthus. So there's a little bit of backstory here that plays out in the opening pages of the Odyssey. And this backstory, this kind of parallel story of the house of Atreus, Agamemnon's father is Atreus, and it's described as the house of Atreus. This ends up, this family here, starting with Agamemnon and his wife, becomes a kind of parallel story to Odysseus's family and what's going on in Odysseus's household. Remember, when we turn to Ithaca and look at Odysseus's kingdom, the issue of his household, the private world, is connected with the issue of his kingdom, the public world, because he's both king of Ithaca, but also the head of his own household. And the two positions are really two sides of the same coin, right? So what happens? Agamemnon takes the men to Troy, and they're all on their ships. And the gods basically thwart the Greeks from traveling any further toward Troy. And the gods force the Greeks to make a human sacrifice in order for their ships to pass to go on to Troy. Who is that human sacrifice? That human sacrifice is Iphigenia, Agamemnon's daughter. I know there's a lot of names here, but once we get these, you're not going to have too many more consequential ones, actually. So he sacrifices his own daughter so that the Greeks can go on to fight at Troy. What a horrific and awful thing, a horrific choice. Guess what? Agamemnon's wife is not so thrilled about this, right? She's not thrilled at all. As Agamemnon is gone for those 10 years of the Trojan War, she takes up with a man, Aegisthus. He's like the suitors. Clytemnestra is like Penelope back at home in Ithaca. And Aegisthus is like all those suitors who are seeking Penelope's hand while her husband is far, far away. Anyway, so with the time we have remaining, let's turn and just pick up the text here. And what I want to do is finish the class with getting an explanation of why this story about Agamemnon and his wife and this guy Aegisthus and his son Orestes, why is this story being told here, right? What have we been trying to do today primarily? Get a grasp of the situation that we find ourselves in on Ithaca and what's going on and what time is it in the context of the whole story. What moment is it, right? This little parallel tale of Agamemnon, got it, Ariba. This little tale of Agamemnon and his family sets us up in our expectation for the rest of the text. Okay. Could I have a volunteer read for us, please? Who would like to read? Michael, can you read for us? Okay.
What are we reading?
Just starting up at the top here. Top of, oh, you know what? Let me switch. How about that? Just start from but one man alone.
Did you say my name, Professor?
I did. I was asking you to
Oh.
read. Can you read?
Yeah, I can.
All right, go for it. But one man
But
alone.
one man alone, his heart set on his wife and his return, Calypso. The bewitching nymph, the lustrous goddess, held him back, deep in her arching caverns, craving him for her husband. But then, when the wheeling seasons brought the year round, that year spun out by the gods when he should reach his home, Ithaca, though not even there, would be free of trials. Even among his loved ones, then every god took pity, all except Poseidon. He raged on, seething against the great Odysseus, till he reached his native land.
Okay. Let's just pick up a couple points here. But one man alone. What's the significance of that phrase? He's the one man who is still alive, who has not yet returned from Troy. And this picks him out as very odd and unusual, and there's something wrong. And I don't think it's totally clear why he's the one man who has not returned. We don't have a full picture of why that might be. And I think it's a complicated question. He says, Homer does, his heart is set on his wife and his return. Question, has Odysseus's heart singularly been set on his return home and his wife? Is that the sole focus of his journey from Troy, to get home?
Yes.
Well, we haven't actually, have we actually learned about his trip from Troy yet? Through book 8?
No.
No, we haven't. We don't know about all the decisions he made on that journey. And right now he's just stuck on Calypso's island. Let's just say this. I think there's a question about, does he want to get home? Yes. But is that his only goal in the journey? Is that his only priority? Is that his singular priority? I'm not so sure, right? I think if it were, he would have gotten home a long time ago, right? So there's some deep ambiguities. This is why Penelope is in this like tortured condition. And this gives us some of the complexity to this character. There's more than one side to him. So the other thing is, here it says, the years spun out by the gods when he should reach his home, Ithaca, though not even there would he be free of trials. So there's two big questions. Is he going to make it back home? And even if he does, what the heck is going to happen then? Question, is he going to make it back to Ithaca? Do we know that answer already, even though we haven't seen him arrive on Ithaca?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, the text, let's be clear. The narrator, Homer, basically tells us he's going to make it back home, right? So the question is not, is he going to make it to Ithaca? The question really is, what the heck is going? So what is this situation being painted in the first book, in the first 4 books? It's establishing your expectations about what's going to happen in the future. He's going to make it back home. But what does Homer say? Even there, he would not be free of trials. What's meant by he would not be free of trials? He's obviously not going to court. What are we talking about here?
Like a test or like temptation?
Yeah, it's kind of a test. How else might we think of trials?
Lesson of
If you go through trials and tribulations, that's an expression we have, trials and tribulations. What are you going through? You're going through blank.
Hardships.
Yeah, challenges. So what is Homer already told us? Even when he makes it home, he's going to face many challenges and obstacles, AKA trials. Well, let's be clear. We're not told explicitly what they are, but what are they? What are the challenges Odysseus is going to face when he gets home?
his wife might be married off.
Yeah, his wife could be married off. Oh my goodness, what do I do now? I'm a third wheel. What else? What other challenge might he face?
Ithaca will no longer be his kingdom.
He could come home and he's nobody. He's not the king anymore. What else? What if his wife is not married yet?
Suitors won't want to leave.
He's got to deal with all those suitors. And the suitors are many, and he is one man. I know he's a hero, but that's a lot of people to fight through in the Quentin Tarantino movie where the one guy like shoots them up, all the bad guys. Big challenge, right? What other trial, what other challenge might he face? This guy's been away from home for 20 years. He's been off to war. War has changed him. He's coming back a different man. What other trial might he face that's more personal?
Guess you'll have to get back into like regular life.
Yeah. He's been away for 20 years. He's evolved, changed over those 20 years. And guess what? So has his wife. So has Ithaca. Does he still? Home is where your identity resides and has its place. Is Ithaca still his home? Is it still the place where he belongs? Right? Yes, there's a palace there, but is that his home? Is that where he still belongs? This is a great question. You think the real world of soldiers going off to fight, they come back and they find their wives remarried with kids with from another husband. I don't know what I was reading, but there was this great little tale. I mean, it wasn't a tale, it was a true story of a woman who had written her husband during World War II to say that, or boyfriend, that she had moved on and she had had a child with another man. And like, I hope that's okay, honey, because you're not here. And I had to keep living my life. Right. She sent him a pack of cigarettes to make him feel better. I have to remember where I read that. Okay, let's just read through the rest of this, Michael, if you could.
But now Poseidon had gone to visit Ethiopians worlds away. Ethiopians off at the furthest limits of mankind, a people split in two, one part where the sun god sets and part where the sun god rises. There Poseidon went to receive an offering, bulls and rams by the hundred. Far away at the feast the sea lord sat and took his pleasure. But the other gods at home in Olympian Zeus's hall met for a full assembly there, and among them now the father of men and gods was first to speak, sorely troubled, remembering handsome
Aegisthus. So this is the lover
Aegisthus.
of Agamemnon's wife. And Agamemnon's wife was livid with him because he sacrificed their daughters so the Greeks could go and fight at Troy.
The man Agamemnon's son, renowned Orestes, killed, recalling Aegith. How do you say that again?
Aegisthus.
Aegisthus. Zeus arranged the immortal powers. Ah, now shameless, the way their mortals blame the gods. From us alone, they say, come all their miseries. Yes, but they themselves, with their own reckless ways, compound their pains beyond their proper share.
Okay, let's
Look at
pause right now.
Aegisthus now.
So just a couple more minutes and we're done. So Zeus is talking about the miseries of humankind. Let's put it this way, the suffering that's involved in all human life. And he's specifically referencing this story about Aegisthus, the lover of Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon. He got killed by Orestes. We'll see why in a second. Now, he's talking about Aegisthus here, who gets killed by Orestes, the son of Agamemnon. But he's talking also about all human beings. And he's talking about the source of human suffering. And human suffering is a central theme of the entire text. Odysseus is the long-suffering veteran. He suffers greatly throughout this whole journey. Question, why does Zeus say men suffer? And there are two reasons. What causes the suffering of mankind?
Disobedience of gods.
Okay, number one, the gods punish them. That's part of it. What's the other? Or the gods just met out suffering. It's not even clear that it's punishment. It could be punishment, but it's not clear that it is. So one part of the suffering of mankind comes from the work of the gods, and there's no say in it. You're gonna suffer in life, you have no choice. Where does the other part of the suffering come from, however? It doesn't come from the gods, it comes from where? It says they compound their pains beyond their proper share. The proper share of suffering is the proper share that the gods give out, but they compound it like compound interest. They make it worse than it has to be from something that the human beings do. What do the human beings do that cause even more suffering than is necessary? We'll come back to it then. Michael, you want to just keep going here and we'll finish up?
Yeah, sure. Look at Aegisthus now, above and beyond his share, he stole Atreides' wife. He murdered the warlord coming home from Troy, though he knew it meant his own total ruin. Far in advance, we told him ourselves, dispatching the guide, the giant killer Hermes. Don't murder the man, he said. Don't court his wife. Beware, revenge will come for Orestes.
Agamemnon's son.
Agamemnon's son. Then that day he comes of age and longs for his native land. So Hermes warned with all the good will in the world. But would Aegisthus hardened heart give way? Now he pays the price, all at a single stroke.
All right, what's the price Aegisthus paid? He paid with his life. He was killed by Orestes, Agamemnon's son. Why did Orestes kill Aegisthus? What did Aegisthus do? Aegisthus murdered Agamemnon when he came back from Troy. Why? Because he was in love with Agamemnon's wife, and he was helping her get revenge for the sacrifice of their daughter. Okay, let's finish up here in 30 seconds. Why does this story matter? Because it has to do with what the question is that's being asked here at the outset of the story. We know that Odysseus is going to make it home to Ithaca. That's not the central question that we're to pose as the reader and think and cogitate on about what might happen in the rest of the book, rest of the story. The question really is, what is going to happen to Odysseus when he arrives at Ithaca? Why are we being told this story about Aegisthus and Agamemnon and Orestes and blah, 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 blah? Because this story runs parallel to the story of Odysseus. Agamemnon, a veteran at Troy, comes home just like Odysseus. He comes home to a situation in which there's a suitor, Aegisthus, who has taken up with his wife, just like the suitors and Penelope. Aegisthus does what? Aegisthus murders the veteran coming home from war. And Orestes, who's like Telemachus, murders Aegisthus as revenge for the act. What is this story foreshadowing here?
That that story might have an influence on what happens when Odysseus returns.
But even more specifically than that, absolutely, totally. More specifically, what is this story posing? What question is it posing?
Doesn't end well for Odysseus.
More specifically than that. Are the suitors going to do what?
Kill him.
Yeah, are the suitors going to take Penelope's hand and kill Odysseus when he comes home? Now, Homer doesn't, got it, Alexander, Homer doesn't say that, but that's obviously what's being insinuated here. This question of, is Odysseus going to come home to a situation in which his wife is taken and the suitors are going to murder him the way Aegisthus murdered Agamemnon? This is the question that this story is really posing. Let's answer it. What do you think? Is this what the suitors are going to do to him? Do we think this is what's going to happen to Odysseus?
Yes. No, the opposite.
So one person says yes, and other people say the opposite. Do we know right now what's going to happen to Odysseus?
No.
Okay, good answer. That's why we got to read the rest of the book to find out. It's a cliffhanger. But I think you should have some suspicions about what's probably going to happen. You can probably take an educated guess. All righty. So thank you for staying over here. Let's call it a night. Thank you for a lovely class. And I will see you all next Tuesday.
Have a good
Good
night.
night, Professor.
Have a good
Good
day.
night.